open it up to Q&A. As you know, the topic for today is how to find research questions. It's obviously a very, very large topic, and any general answer to that can only be general in the sense that this topic, ultimately needs to be approached by each individual in terms of their own research interests or questions. But I will try to make some general remarks which will hopefully be helpful, and hopefully it will provide some kind of space within which you can then ask more specific questions that you are thinking about or being bothered by right now, right? So broadly, I think we can say that the topic for today, finding research questions, has at least, I would say, two dimensions, right? So for want of better terms, I will call these the practical or pragmatic dimension, number one, by which I simply mean the actual process of applying to graduate programs, PhD programs, whether that's in India or the US, Europe, elsewhere. There's a set of practical, pragmatic concerns that one has to keep in mind when applying there, writing SOPs, etc. And then there's a second larger aspect, which again, for want of a better word, I will call the critical philosophical aspect, which is broader in the sense that it's not just about applications, but it's about who we are, why we want to do research, and why we want to continue that beyond just doing a PhD, right? So these are obviously two things that are linked, but given the world we live in, sadly, they're not identical, right? So I'll talk about them first, the practical aspect, and then the critical aspect. Of course, there is something that these two aspects have in common, which is that any question that one asks, any research question or set of questions that one asks, must be, you can say, legible with respect to, or it must refer to, or it must be grounded in an existing set of questions, concerns, literatures that already exist, right? So this is true of both dimensions, because ultimately all scholarship is a dialogue or a conversation, or at least it's meant to be, or at least it should be. This is why we have this concept called peer review, right? That's what it's about. It's the dialogue, the conversation we enter into. So this is a common aspect of just doing any kind of research at all, whether one is an independent researcher or affiliated with a university. This is common, but I think the practical, pragmatic aspect has two specific features that I want to highlight. And then the second feature will bring us to the broader sort of critical philosophical aspect of it, right? So the first thing I want to say about the practical aspect is that we live in a world where academic work is super specialized, and it's divided into disciplines and even in some cases sub-disciplines, right? So every discipline, or even nowadays interdisciplinary centers that we have, such as gender and sexuality studies and so on and so forth, every discipline has its own understanding of what is a valid question. And by implication, every discipline has its own understanding of what it means to answer those valid questions, right? In other words, how to answer those questions, right? This how aspect we often refer to with the cryptic term method, and every discipline has its own understanding of what is a method to answer a question, right? So if you are in the economics discipline, for example, the method is either building mathematical models or doing statistical analysis, regressions, econometrics, so on. If you are in anthropology, the method is ethnography. If you are a historian, you have to convince the department that you have archives, right? Now, archives can be anything, and we can talk about that. But what I'm trying to say here is that the questions that are acceptable in one discipline can often not even be considered as a question in another discipline, right? So for myself, I moved from economics to history precisely because of this reason, right? There are questions I wanted to ask which were not even considered questions within the economics discipline. So why does this matter? It matters because I think if you are planning to apply, or if you want to apply to PhD programs or be an academic, given that we live in a world divided by disciplines, you really have to try and figure out what kind of disciplinary sort of boundaries, framework interest you, right? Because I'll just give you an example from my personal experience of working with Eklavya scholars. If you want to study any aspect of caste, whatever that is, and you are interested in doing ethnography, right? You're interested in understanding something that's happening today, then applying to history departments is not really your best bet, right? Because history is a discipline organized by time and space and focused on the past. So if you send in a statement of purpose, the first thing they'll look at when and where, and is that at least 30 years before our time? If it is not, they will immediately say, well, this belongs to another discipline. Now you might say, well, there can be an oral archive, there are oral histories, but well, not every history department will have oral, people who are interested in oral histories of caste, right? If anything, very, very, very few places, if at all, will have that, right? So if you want to apply, the first thing to figure out is what is the broad sort of conceptual space and methodological space, right, that appeals to me, that I want to work with. Because applications take time and effort, and ultimately also they cost money, right? So you have to figure this out before you actually enter the act of sending emails and applying, etc. Because if your work does not fit the broad disciplinary contours, and if it's not interesting to the professors in that department, given how competitive the admissions process is, they will simply not look at it, or simply not respond to you, right? So this is absolutely the first step that you have to do. Once you have figured out something like the disciplinary boundary framework that interests you, then you have to, of course, ask your own questions. This is the second thing I wanted to say about the practical dimension, right? So to ask your own questions, you have to do something like what we know as a literature review, right? So there are two things I want to say about literature review, again, partly out of my experience of working with Eklavya scholars, right? So when you are applying, or when you're thinking about writing a statement of purpose, the statement of purpose is not the place to do the kind of literature review where you summarize what different authors have said, right? It's assumed that that there is not enough space. And when you apply to a department in the US, for example, which I know the most about, so I'll stick to US examples, the admissions committee will not be made up of people who are just South Asians or who are interested in histories or ethnographies of South Asia. So you have to speak to a broader audience, and you have to give them a summary of approaches or frameworks, why things matter, right? So you can't do a literature review of the kind you would write for a master's or an MPhil dissertation. You cannot do that in the statement of purpose. The purpose of a literature review is to clarify your own thinking, right? Is to clarify your own thinking, and then to find things that have been, broadly speaking, again, in very general terms, left undone or unsaid, right? So what you have to do, you have to show how your project, how your concerns, how your questions emerge from the literature, right? What you have to convince the reader is that your questions are grounded in the literature, but you are doing something that hasn't been fully addressed by the literature. You cannot possibly give the reader of a statement of purpose a summary of all the literature that you've read. And you also need to convince the reader that your questions can be answered. And here again, method comes in, right? So if you're applying to an anthropology department, you have to convince them that your questions are such that can be answered through ethnographic work. If you are a historian applying to a history department, you have to convince them that there are many, many interesting questions we can ask about the past, but very often the most interesting questions are very hard to answer, precisely because the archives are not built necessarily to answer the most interesting questions for us today, right? So you have to convince the reader of that your question emerges from the literature, and that it can be answered by the method that is acceptable, or the most approved of method in that discipline center, whatever it might be, right? So that's what you have to do. You can do a broad literature review where you summarize readings, etc., but the actual statement that you write, or when you write your own questions or project, you cannot begin by summarizing what everyone else has said. That is assumed that you have to begin by trying to articulate your concerns and why they matter. Now you can say that, well, that's all fine, Anirban, but you haven't told us how to actually do all of this, right? So, or what would be a valid set of questions to ask when applying or writing a statement of purpose, right? So That's, I think, a valid point. I plead guilty to that. But there are two reasons, right? A, it's impossible to fully answer this in general terms, as I said in the beginning, because everyone has different projects and different interests, and we can absolutely talk about that in more specific ways. And I'll just take a few more minutes. And the second reason why it's difficult to answer this fully is because I think when it comes to this question of how to move from the existing literature, how to move from your literature review where you summarize things and say, oh, person A thinks like this, person B thinks like this, how to move from that to your questions, what concerns you, your project. This is the point where the practical, pragmatic, and the critical philosophical dimensions are very hard to separate. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that, every discipline at any point in time is going to have certain presuppositions about questions, topics of interest, or even methods, right? So, and in the humanities and the social sciences, there's always a political dimension to this, right? I don't think it's a problem that there is a political dimension. I think it is unavoidable that there will always be a political dimension to this. The problem is that we are so super specialized now, and the admissions process is so competitive that I think to some extent, it is also unavoidable that one has to try and find a way to fit into current trends in scholarship, right? And I mean this to some extent, I'm not saying completely. So, acceptable, just to give you a couple of examples, acceptable questions might often be narrow in the sense that you might say, this is an existing framework. I think this is interesting. I agree with a lot of what it's saying, but I think it hasn't looked at this particular empirical situation or context. And I think that if we look at this empirical dimension or this situation, then something new might be said. So I want to extend this framework by looking at this empirical dimension aspect. Second thing you can say is another example. You can say, well, this concern has been looked at by other scholars, but I am bringing multiple approaches or frameworks to bear on this empirical question, right? So again, I can just give you one example from the news recently, right? So we've seen recently news about divisions within, right, the Dalit movement, right? So Madiga's questioning the predominance of the Malas and so on and so forth. We know historically the Mahars have, dominated the Dalit movement and so on and so forth. So you can say this is a question that people have been concerned with, and I have looked at the existing literature, but I want to bring this new set of questions or frameworks into it, right? So again, to give very broad general examples that we need to specify further. But when I said that you need to do this to some extent, why I said that is, I think, and this is where I'm getting completely into my opinion. This is entirely my opinion, so please feel free to disagree completely with this. But I think, in my opinion, it's not possible to sustain meaningful research in the long run by only trying to fit into contemporary trends of scholarship, right? I think ultimately you have to arrive at questions yourself, and you have to feel that the questions you're asking are meaningful to you. You have to feel that the questions are justified and important to sustain research in the long run, because this isn't easy in either sort of even in emotional terms. And although it can be financially secure, you're never going to be rich by being an academic, right? So to sustain this in the long run, I think there has to be a very personal dimension to this. So you have to ask yourself questions like, why do I want to study this, right? If I want to study this, why do I want to, right? In the existing literature, what do I actually agree with and what do I disagree with? So you have to arrive at these questions by making sense of your dissatisfactions and how you arrived at this point in life that you are in right now. And again, it's impossible to answer this in general terms because that journey is different for every individual. So I'll just end by saying that, I don't have any easy answers to how to mediate these two things, right? This practical, pragmatic aspect, where you have to try and figure out what a discipline wants, what professors are interested in what currently, and where can I actually apply to actually get a degree and become the academic that I fully am capable of being. That practical aspect and the broader questions about how you arrived at the questions you have and what you agree or disagree with in the scholarship now, how to mediate these two things. Again, I don't know a general answer to that. I don't think there can be one, but we can talk in more specific ways about that. And I can, Shagoto will mediate this, but I can try to help a few of you through the actual process of applications. But I will say that if you want to, again, fully my opinion, that if you want to sustain research in the long run, if you want to make it meaningful for you and uh, possible for you to move through all of the multiple disappointments that are inevitably going to come in the process of actually going through this journey, then I think you have to try and be conscious and aware of both of these dimensions and try to consciously mediate that. That I think, is a very vague answer, I know, but that's the best I can do. Being conscious and aware of this tension, if there exists, between these two things is, I think, the only way to sustain this in the long run. So I'll stop there and we can start the Q&A and go on for as long as we need to.
Yes. So for those of you who have like any queries, or for that matter, if you want to discuss the research question that you have already come up with, and maybe not very sure about the validity of it, or unsure about how to get it going forward. So keeping that in mind, I mean, you can write in the chat box also, or I mean, it would be even better if you could just interact with us in a normal way, just by uh, turning on your camera and mic and just speak up the queries that you have, or like if you want to discuss your research question that you have come up with, anything from your end.
Or, I mean, just to interject, sorry, if there is anything else that you're bothered by right now with regard to the admissions process, or if there's anything you think I might be able to help with, even if it's not directly connected to what I just said, please feel free.
And if language is a problem, you can talk in Hindi also.
Yeah, you can use whatever language you feel comfortable with. I will respond in English, but yes, please.
Should I go first?
Please.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much for such a brief discussion about things. So I'm right now actually I'm a sociologist and I'm trying to get into PhD in primarily in USA. And the research which I'm trying to do is on mental health and caste, particularly effective dimension of structures of violence in institutions, premier institutions like IITs and central universities. And the research question which I'm trying to deal with is particularly more of a social problem than a sociological problem, which I think I'm trying to cope up with. Because when I gave that research question to one of my professors, she asked me that it's a social problem since a lot of institutional murders they take place in India. So it's not actually a sociological problem to explore. So how do I make it a more sociological or methodologically relevant question? So I'm trying to explore how particularly Dalit Bahujan students in IITs and central universities, a sort of comparison between two. How do they cope up with psychological distress that comes along with caste identities? So more of how anti-caste agency is developed into institutions. So that is a question which I'm trying to deal.
Yeah, thank you, Jatin, for your question. I think, firstly, I'll say that's a fantastic topic. Second thing I will say is that what you are facing or what you have faced with your professor is precisely what the first point I made about disciplines, right? So our disciplines have become so narrow, and our vision has become so narrow, in terms of the methods we use in our disciplines, that we can say things like that it's a social problem, not a sociological problem. To me, again, not casting aspersions at anyone, that statement makes no sense, because sociology is the study of society. So if it's happening in society, sociology should find ways to address it. That said, the practical problem you're facing is that sociology has become a very narrow discipline. And even in the US, a lot of sociology departments um, are into a lot of sort of quantitative methods, things like that, and so on. So historically in India, sociology departments were built by anthropologists, social anthropologists, right? That's why we never really had separate anthropology programs. Most of the best anthropologists we had were housed in the sociology departments in India. So I think if you look at anthropology programs in the US, maybe I will think about this if something comes to my mind. There can be programs which are interested, like maybe not psychology departments as such, but there can be sociology or anthropology programs that are interested in questions of psychology, mental health, and you might be able to apply to that. In terms of what you need to do, in terms of extending this, I think the question is, your starting point is great. What you now need to actually convince when you send in the applications or the statements, etc., is that this can be answered, right? What I said, right? So how will you answer the question, right? What will you do, right? Will you go and talk to people? Will there be any institutional sort of barriers in trying to do so? How will you choose the people you want to talk to? Will you just do ethnographic observation? You'll just go and see what's happening. It's very hard to see what's actually happening inside the hostels, right? For example, if we could have an ethnography of ragging, for example, how fascinating would that be? But that's almost impossible to do, because you won't be able to get into that space where the worst forms of that are actually happening. So the question you have to do methodologically to make this a really attractive project for an anthropology department interested in these questions, or questions of mental health and its relationship to society. Because I think in broad terms, there'll be departments in the US that are surely going to be interested in this, right? What's the effect of marginalization and exclusion on the mental health of those who are marginalized, and how do they sort of build their own agency against that, right? That's a fascinating topic. There'll definitely be departments interested in that question broadly. What you have to now do is further specify this, right? How you can actually answer this, because you obviously can't use quantitative methods that a quantitatively inclined sociology department will be interested in, and so on and so forth. If this were 40 years ago, I would say maybe you can look at sociological theories to apply. I think the situation we are in now, maybe looking at theories like, just to give you the obvious example, Durkheim on suicide, that probably wouldn't be the best way to try and write an SOP, but for your own interest, that's something you might do if you haven't already. But I think if you specify the question further in terms of method, and then try to figure out, well, given the methods I can adopt, what are the spaces that would be appropriate for me? I would think anthropology of some kind. I think that should be
Yeah.
totally doable.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go
Actually, I'm
ahead.
looking at it through a phenomenological lens. I'm looking at lived experiences of student uh, from an ethnographic like method. So I'll navigate through two things. First is by students themselves. Secondly, through these groups. There are some groups already in like institutions, particularly. So we belong is one group which addresses the question of mental health and caste, and there are some of the political organizations already, student groups, student organizations. They also help in articulating these such experiences in some manner. So this is my right now current plan. and I'm still researching how I can better navigate with this question, because obviously this is a political question itself. And recently some work has been done on it, primarily by Gaurav Pathania in USA, and that's also phenomenological work, so I'm looking at through phenomenological lens. So I think that would give you like better understanding what I'm trying to do.
Thank you for that. And I think if there are people who are already doing it, then you already have people who are doing it. But I would also say that, again, this is what I meant when I said how to navigate the practical dimensions and the your own set of concerns or interests, which is that you have not just you, not just Jatin, this is generally true for everyone. You have to find ways to express your interests or articulate your interests without, you can of course do it in terms of your preferred conceptual, theoretical, methodological sort of framework, whether that's phenomenology or anything else, but you can't bank on one person, right, or two persons. uh, you have to be able to apply at least a little more broadly. So again, this is not to say that you give up on what you want to do. This is to say that you have to find ways to express your framework or your concerns to a person, let me put it this way, to a person who knows nothing about phenomenology, or who may even be opposed to phenomenology, but who is interested in this broader question of what happens to the mental health of those who are marginalized or stigmatized in society. That broader question is a concern for lots of people throughout the world. And there'll be many, many departments in the US or anywhere else who would understand that question, but would not necessarily be interested in phenomenology, and may, as I said, may even be opposed to it. So you cannot bank on just that. I'm not saying don't do that. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm saying you have to find a way to speak at multiple registers. Right? And you have to be able to present your work to those who would be interested in the broader question, but know nothing about phenomenology. And again, this is true for everybody, right? This is true for everybody. Whatever your topic is, you will have your chosen framework. You will have your political convictions. You should. We all do. And that, that will divide us. Politics is by definition division. So no problems with that. But at the practical, pragmatic level, and also to broaden the dialogue, right? Also to broaden the conversation, we have to be able to express our interests to people who may be interested in the broad topic, but would not necessarily be interested in the particular approach. That's a theoretical approach or methodological, whatever, right? So that's what I meant by navigating these two things. And this is essential. I mean, I cannot stress this enough. I mean, given the overall sort of situation of the world, um, this is absolutely essential. You have to, everyone has to be able to do this in order to stand a chance given the levels of competition. We cannot bank on a few people. It simply will not do. I have a question here on the chat, so let me address that from Bashar, who is saying he's interested in post-colonial militant trade union movements in Bengal. Is this approachable for the universities? Yes, I think absolutely. I mean, this is a broad topic, of course. I mean, when you say post-colonial, I presume you mean post 1947. And I think actually that's a very good starting point, simply because so little work has been done, whether on Bengal or on India overall, by historians. We have historically tended to divide up the labor by, post pre-1947 is historian, post-1947 is political scientists and sociologists and anthropologists and so on. So not many historians have done work on that. So I think it's a small field, which means, uh, you don't have to like read 500 books to be able to say how your work is new. So I think that's good. Of course, now you need to look at the actual work, like, Shekhar Bandyopadhyay's work on meanings of freedom, and then, Joy Chatterjee and some other work also at the pan-India level. Given that there's so little work by historians, you should also look at what political scientists have said about labor movements, what political scientists have said about the relationship of caste politics and labor movements. And then through a sort of review of that literature on your own time, you need to figure out questions that would be interesting to historians. And I think if you don't go beyond the 1980s, if you stay up to the 1980s, early 90s, I think history departments are definitely willing to look at projects that move up to the 70s and 80s now. More than the 90s, if you move into the 2000s, I don't know. I'm not sure. But if you stay till the 80s, early 90s, I think history departments would definitely be interested. You'll have to find individual people who would want to do that. But as a broad topic, I definitely think it's worth thinking.
I have two things to say here. One is to Jatin. So, Jatin, you just mentioned the name of Professor Gaurav Patania. So, in case you need any help, or I mean, Gaurav Patania is also associated with us. He's also mentoring one of our mentee. So, in case you need any help from him, or if you want to discuss your research plan with Professor Patania, please do let me know. And second thing is a question to Anirban is that like, why is this bifurcation between like before pre 1947 people are getting addressed as historian, and post that period, post that time frame, they're getting bifurcated into some other names, slightly fancier. So why is this tendency, why is this trend even?
That's a huge question. I'm not sure I'm exactly the right person to answer that, simply because I spend most of my time thinking about the 18th and early 19th centuries. But I would say it's kind of, maybe, I mean, at the very basic level, it was, it's changing now. It's no longer true that historians stick to 1947 as some kind of absolute break or something. But I think, because the nationalist movement posited independence as this major break, and the critiques we had of that in the immediate post 47 period, with said things like yeah Zari Jhuta hai, etc., were of course marginalized, etc., and people lost touch with that. That's one reason. And I think the trauma of partition also helped, or sort of not helped. Trauma of partition worsened that sense of an absolute bifurcation between the two epochs. And so that's why I think historians. And then there was the question of archives. I mean, because a lot of the immediate post-independence archives are only now being made available. There are still things like Doipan Sen, who wrote the book on Jogendranath Mondal. Uh, Even some things from the 30s and 40s, the police records, he was able to look at some of them, but some are still under lock and key at Lal Bazar. So there's the question of archives. It's better on all those fronts now. If we stay in the post, again, you'll not be able to look at anything much for the emergency, right? If you want to study how the state actually uh, behaved or thought during the emergency, there's very little you can actually look at. So I think those are some basic factors. Beyond that, there can be many things about how disciplines thought, departments in India thought about themselves, what they wanted to do. I think a whole history of this could be written, right? Why did this happen this way? I think is by now should be an interesting historical question in its own right.
So if there is any more question, people please uh, do write in the chat box, or please you can just turn on your mic and speak it up, whatever works for you. And also the recording of this session will go to our archive that we have of the playlist of all the past events that we have done. And so if later on, I mean, a lot of people will come up to us asking for the later recordings. I hope you not have any reservations on that.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, fine.
As long as it's helpful, it's fine.
So would you like to now give the write-up thing?
Yeah, I mean, the write-up is, You can approach this in many ways. It's more like a thinking exercise, but I think if you write it out, it would be good. And I think the given the question that Jatin asked also brought us back to this issue of navigating between the practical and the more sort of your personal interests and critical dimension. So I would say write, I don't want to set any minimum, maximum word limits, but I think if you start writing, it'll inevitably be at least 500. So just try to write or think about how you are currently navigating the critical questions that you are interested in, right? The questions, concerns that you seem to want to arrive at or that appeal to you. So again, to ask, not to pick on you, Bhashwar, but you said you're interested in the Gherao concept. Well, why? Right? What is it about it, that phenomenon, that interests you? If you try to write that out without just summarizing other thinkers, I think that will already help you, right? I think this is an important exercise, right? You try to find out what you're trying to think about writing an SOP or whatever you're trying to write about or think about right now, and then say, I'm interested in this. Well, why? Without summarizing what other scholars have said, why are you interested in this? And think about how you are navigating this sort of critical dimension of your research, what you're interested in, and the practical dimension of actually finding places to apply to, finding people who are interested in, and the actual process of applying abroad, right? So just think about what stage are you in and how are you navigating these two things, right? What's bothering you about either of those dimensions? Do you feel like there is a tension between the two? If there is a tension between the two, then why? What are you actually facing a problem with when you are trying to think about the practical dimension? Is it that you can't find people you think would be interested in it? Or is it that you're finding a hard time articulating your own concerns in terms of the existing literature? There can be many problems one arrives at when one tries to mediate one's own sort of personal interests and the way to frame a statement or research proposal that would apply broadly. And again, I'm not trying to be annoying here, but I cannot emphasize this enough. You have to write something that appeals to people broadly. You cannot say, I'm interested in one tiny bit of thing and then say, others must be interested in this. You cannot do that. You have to find a way to express your interests in broader terms. So there can be many things that are creating a problem for you. And again, this will be different for each individual. So I want you to try and think through this and write whatever comes to mind, right? Stream of consciousness. No one is going to grade you on this. No one is going to put this in your autobiographies, right? When you write those. So just stream of consciousness, think about what is actually bothering you, what is actually of concern to you right now, and then see where you are at, right? See where you arrive at, because the point at which you arrive is the point from which we can pick up to talk about individual projects and individual sort of concerns and applications and so on and so forth, right? So that's what I want you to try and think through and write. There is no set format, there is no right or wrong. Just write whatever comes to your mind, but think about this tension, right? How are you trying to move from the literature to your concerns, and how are you trying to navigate between your concerns and the practical concerns of actually sending in applications? Because as I said, there are practical and pragmatic dimensions to this, which we have to acknowledge and think about when we apply, but we also can't just surrender to it, and we have to feel like what we are doing means something to us. Otherwise, this is not sustainable in the long run. Does that make sense? Does the exercise make any sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. But can you just draft one-liner or two-liner in the chat box so that I can also forward it to the larger group that we have?
Can I take a few minutes
Yeah,
and
please,
email
please.
it to you
Yeah.
or WhatsApp you something?
What's I would do?
Yeah. Okay. So just give me 5 minutes after the meeting.
Yes,
I
yes.
will write out a sentence, and then I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Bhaswar has asked something, Joy Chatterjee or Joya Chatterjee?
Joya Chatterjee. Yeah.
Joya.
Joya. I think she spells it as Joya.
Joya.
Joya Chatterjee. She has 2 books on partition, which I think covers the post 47 period. And of course, I don't know if there's work on trade unionism, but of course, because of Bangladesh's political history, because its independence comes much later, uh, Bangladeshi historians have actually written much more about post 47 periods. So if you look at Bangladesh, you will actually find much more literature on the post 47 period, which I'm not an expert in, but I'm happy to talk about this with you as well as we have talked about that Bhasha separately. So yes, Joya Chatterjee is the person I was referring to. I will frame a couple of sentences briefly and I'll send it to Shagato and he will put it on the Google Drive, right?
And I've also created a drive link when all of you can just upload your write-up draft.
Yeah,
And
and
we'll look into it.
we'll depending on how many people send it in, I will try to take a quick look at what you submit. If you're really interested in following up and attending the second session, I will look at what you send in, and then we can try to discuss more in more specific terms. But do the thinking, right? It's the thinking part that is the actual homework.
Yes. And on the basis of that, we will be able to help curate future sessions
Yes.
on the basis of
Makes
that.
sense.
We are nearing the end, but still, if you have any question, any of you,
Yes,
you can just.
Sagat, I have.
Yeah, Abhilash wants to ask
Yes,
a
yes, yes,
question. Please
please.
go ahead.
Anirban, I have like, am I audible?
Yes, can you
Okay,
speak a little
sorry.
more loudly?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes,
Now it's clear.
it's
Okay.
better. Thank you.
I have I have made a research proposal and that was accepted by two Sussex professor. But now I'm due to my scholarship rejection, I was not able to join the program. But now I understand, like after attending this session, like should I go again the research proposal and make more wider or more deeper this proposal? Should I, or just as they accepted, what should I like?
Can you tell me very briefly what your interest is?
My interested is my title is research proposal title is erosion of identity examining the dual reality of indigenous women in migration. So
Okay.
I'm interested in work those who are indigenous women and migrating from Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand to Mumbai or Delhi,
Mm.
and due to this migration, they face they lost their identity and they lost their culture. So in this in the erosion process, they face discrimination, they face lots of exploitation. So I want to uh, study these things.
Okay.
And
Um,
can I
Firstly, no, go ahead. Sorry.
okay, can I say my research question to here, or it is
Yeah, please do. I thought you had stopped. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
okay? Like I have very made the basic, but I don't know. This proposal look good because I have sent it to several professor. They said this professor like project proposal is good. So my first question is, what are the various challenges faced by indigenous women in the journey of migration? This is my first question. And second was, how do challenges impact the erosion of culture and identity of indigenous women? Third is, what is the experience of indigenous women with various agencies, institutions, and civil society organization before and after migration? And fourth one is what are the factor that influence stakeholder initiative to mitigate challenges and response towards the indigenous women's migration. So these are my main four questions which I was interested to study. So should I like break this question or make more deeper, or like is
Oh,
it okay?
I another question before I answer your question. Did you apply when you applied last time? Did
Yes,
you apply only to Sussex or did you apply to other places too? And where did you apply?
like I have applied more than 150 university.
Okay,
Uh,
and throughout the world.
I have applied in US, no, not US, in Australian university, British, like UK, and one or two
Can you just
in
like name
Canada.
a few universities? That would be a bit more specific, I guess.
And yeah, your voice is again becoming very faint. Can you speak up
Okay,
a little?
now is my voice
Yes,
is okay.
yes, better. So you
Sorry.
said US, sorry, Australia, UK, and
And New Zealand,
okay,
like in New Zealand, Auckland University, I have applied. In UK, Warwick, Sussex, like there are lots of I have
yeah,
to find out. So more than 100 plus 100 plus 150 I have applied.
okay,
So some of university like professor make my proposal according to them, their interest. I have that also uh, make changes and send it to them. And then after there are they want the whole research different. So that was not matched with my interest. So
yeah,
said so
yeah.
that's why I was backed.
No, I think I'll say a few things. I mean, I don't know enough about Australia and New Zealand, but the UK is a very poor country now, and it has very little funding to give to
Yes,
humanities and social science students. Only the bigger places like Oxford, Cambridge, so as LSE maybe have any funding. So I'm not surprised that it's at the funding stage that
yes,
you were unable to cross, or the hurdle that you were unable to cross. Um, but I'm not surprised that they liked your proposal, because I think your own interests are,
yes,
I think, like a very good basis for applying abroad. And I think the questions are also very good. I don't think they're too broad. I don't think they're too narrow. What I would suggest is for you to look at centers in the US called Centers for Studies of Race, Indigeneity, and Diaspora, because I think those centers are looking for exactly the kind of questions you're asking. I mean, you're
okay,
not really talking about diaspora directly, but you're talking about migration
yes,
and you're talking about indigeneity, right? So, what I would suggest to try and make the project not different, but as I was telling Jatin and Bashar as well, to make the project legible to scholars who are interested in indigeneity as such more broadly, I would suggest that you look at the literature on indigeneity in the US. And of course, it's a huge topic in Australia as
yes,
well,
yes,
not in enormous depth, but just look at similar projects, right? About, the identity of indigenous women. How is it being affected by things like modernization, urbanization? Uh, is that leading to migration, etc.? So it will not be a perfect parallel, but you're not trying to find that. All you want to see is whether similar questions are being asked in other fields. Just look
mm,
at the literature broadly, not in enormous depth. And I would say try to find places, centers of race, diaspora, and indigeneity in the US
yes,
where you could apply, because I think those centers would absolutely be extremely interested. I mean, there's no guarantee that you'll get in, but applying to the benefit of applying to the US is, if you get in, you get in fully, right? They will
yes,
give you
yes,
the funding that you need. You might have to teach in order to get your stipend, but you'll get it.
yes,
Um, and although it's getting harder now with the political situation, with the
mm,
current political regime, I think a project like yours would definitely find takers in centers like that. And you should look at anthropology departments in general as well. You should look at the CUNY, City University of New York Anthropology Department, where my own sister did her doctoral degree. She looked at the Vedanta mining in Orissa and how that's affecting the Dongria cones and so on. So you should look at anthropology and those centers, and I think you should try to apply to the US because, as I said, I don't know about Australia and New Zealand, but the UK, I'm not surprised that they didn't have money to give you, even if they liked your project, because
Yes.
they don't have enough money.
And also the discipline combination that Avilas wants to get into, it aligns perfectly. I mean, very perfectly with the center that you just mentioned.
Yeah. And
Discipline
those centers are there in many units. There's one at the University of Chicago where I'm at, and bigger universities, middle tier universities, many universities have that. So you'll have a
So,
wide.
so every university, the center this which you have mentioned,
No,
center
not
for
every university will have that, but just search for
center
centers for
for
study of race, diaspora, indigeneity. Some might have the term migration, some might be gender, race, and sexuality studies. But I think in all of those places, if you find people who are interested, and of course, Canada, you can try to find Canada as well, because obviously indigeneity is the big
Yes.
political conflict in Canada, or historically has been, and they're trying to make amends for that by having these centers for the study of indigeneity. And there are plenty of centers. Canada has less money than the US, but same, if they like you and they want you, they will give you the funding. So Canada
yes.
also has those kinds of centers. So you'll have to do a little bit of Googling and searching, but you are more than capable of doing it if you've already applied to so many universities yourselves.
Uh,
And I'm happy to help further if you have any questions. But yes, please do look at those kinds of centers in the US and Canada. I think that's the place to try.
okay.
Yeah. And there is one question from my end. It's on CUNY actually. So it's a bit off track. I mean, not just, yeah. So the thing is that, I mean, we had a few mentors with us. So, I mean, they also had offer letters from CUNY. We have a mentor from who is a doctoral student currently at CUNY. And I mean, there is this financial thing.
Yeah,
It's a state university
yeah,
in the heart of New York.
yeah.
So a lot of people, I mean, I know a few people, those who had offer letters and they really like the program. I mean, as far as CUNY is concerned, I find that their programs are so well curated.
It's excellent.
It's excellent, yeah, in terms of academics. But I mean, I know someone who is, I mean, at this point going through a very hard phase, like mental health, financial things, and all are coming up together. And there are people, those who have had offer letter and they wanted to join in, but then they chose to join somewhere else. They chose
Okay,
Cornell, private universities.
of course.
So, like, how do you think? I mean, the current situation at this point.
Well, I mean, if somebody has also an offer from Cornell, it makes a lot of sense to go to Cornell, unless one would only choose CUNY in that situation if there's somebody or a set of people one absolutely really wants to work with.
Because in my
Um,
case, that was also the thing. I mean, I personally also like their program so much.
Yeah, so
Given
if
all
one
the things,
has an offer
stories that
from
I've heard.
Cornell, one goes to CUNY. But if one only has an offer from CUNY,
Hmm.
one goes to CUNY. And I will say that not just because of CUNY, but I would say that for any American university, because the thing is, if you can get, and I've told this to the other scholars from Eklavya I have spoken to before, if you get in somewhere in the US, doesn't matter how high ranked it is, how much the money you're getting, you will manage. If you've survived in India, you will survive with that money, with that little bit of money. I came first to the University of Utah in Salt Lake City because I didn't get in anywhere else. And the money wasn't great. And University of Utah isn't even ranked in the top 100 in the United States. But once you are here, it's much easier to move from a US university to a bigger US university. There is just no comparison. The difficulty level of coming from India, getting into a US university from India, and moving from a US university to another, there is just no comparison in terms of the level of difficulty. The second one is just far, far, far easier because you are already here, you have a visa, they'll just transfer your details, and the other university will see that you are already in the US, you're at a university, you are able to sort of meet the expected standards at a graduate program in the US. So if you only have one offer, you have to take it. I don't care where it is. I don't care how little money they're giving you. It's going to be easier to move from there to another place than it is going to be to apply again and get in, right? So if you get an offer, even if it's difficult, and CUNY is a city university, it's not even the state of New York, it's the
University,
city.
sorry, yeah.
And the city has been, in dire financial straits since the 1970s. David Harvey has probably written 10 books about this. And they are constantly trying to get rid of it. And, those of us in India, for us, it's very easy to understand why, because CUNY has historically, offered education to poorer sort of students, working class students, effectively for free, right? People can still get a degree from CUNY with minimal debt, student debt. And don't forget, the student debt is $3 trillion in the United States, the overall. So that's why they want to get rid of CUNY, just like they want to, should I say this on camera? That's why they want to get rid of JNU and HU and everything else. So for us in India, it's very easy to understand why they're doing this. But if you get an offer, you take it. You don't reject an offer from a US university. No,
Absolutely, absolutely. What is that thing that you just said about David Harvey, the books?
Oh, David Harvey, I mean, he's written about the crisis and how neoliberalism was instituted in response to the crisis, the state basically backing private capital to destroy all kinds of public infrastructure, how New York City was on the brink of basically bankruptcy. And the banks lent the city money on condition that they privatize a lot of public infrastructure and so on and so forth. And I don't remember the full details, but since the late 90s, David Harvey has been writing multiple books about this. The New Imperialism, I think, was one of the first, where he came up first with the term accumulation by dispossession. And then every book he's written since then, he talks about New York. I mean, he's still around. He's 90 now, I think.
What's his name again?
David Harvey.
David Harvey, okay.
Harvey, geographer. He was in the anthropology department. Even when my sister was there between 2010 and 2018, he was still teaching. Now he's retired, but he's still around. And he's been at CUNY since the late 60s. Early
wow,
70s.
he's 89 now.
Yeah, he's 89. He's born in 1935, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, 35, yeah.
He's a British geographer.
yeah.
Trained in the positivist sort of quantitative tradition, but then became a Marxist. Those are the best kinds of Marxists. But anyway.
Okay. Okay, so it's time now for us to say goodbye, to wrap up the session for now. And on the basis of the responses that we'll get, a lot of people will refer to the recording, and we'll share shortly with you the write-up assignment that you are supposed to attend. And on the basis of that, we will definitely be curating another session by the end of this week or by the end of this month, maybe, whatever works for Anirban. And thank you a lot, Anirban, and thanks a lot to all the people, those who have made their time. Most of the people are working, so it was very, very difficult. I can understand for a lot of people, those who could not join and those who have joined.
That's okay. We'll try to make the next session on a weekend.
On a weekend, yeah.
Yes.
Because I was also getting a lot of requests that, will you please be recording the session? Because I also want to do it, but I will be returning from office at 9 or 9:30. And people are working in the corporate, so I can't really blame them. So
no, of course, I understand. And so we'll do the next session on a weekend. Sure.
Whatever time works for you. And yeah. So thank you. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you.
Yeah. Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Yeah, good
Bye,
night.
everyone.
Bye. Jai Bhim.